Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Wellness Wednesday. I want to first start off by thanking our Wellness Wednesday sponsors, Epigenomics, Genentech, Merck, No Shave November, Taiho Oncology, Turtle Beach, and Quicken Loans. Today we're back with mindfulness coach Andrea Lee. Take it away, Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Lee, and I'm here today to talk to you about mindfulness, the skill of living fully in the present moment, noticing what's happening in the mind, what thoughts might be present, what emotions, what bodily sensations, any stories or tapes that might be playing about the past or the future, and then cultivating the skill of living fully in the here and now. So I'm a mindfulness coach. I work with entertainers, sports teams, attorneys, and also physicians and patients. Anyone looking to improve their mental performance by learning to navigate stress and be more fully in the here and now. So I got into this because my background is that I'm an oncology nurse navigator, walking patients through the system from initial diagnosis through treatment and into survivorship. So my specialty is complex GI. And a nurse navigator basically sits, maybe some of you have navigators, but if you don't, it's basically someone who shepherds you through the system. Make sure that your physician team is all communicating about your plan of care, that everyone's collaborating. Surgical oncology, medical oncology, radiation oncology, interventional radiology, pathology, radiology, anyone that touches the patient's case, making sure that they're all working together. So facilitating that communication. And then also the navigator sits in the center of the healthcare team with the patient and their caregivers to make sure that you always have a point of contact. You always have an advocate, someone who is constantly liaising with your healthcare team and can be there for you each step of the way. So I got into mindfulness because of my work with oncology navigation. I was really struck by the impact stress would have on our cognition and perception. So I'm sure some of you can relate. Anytime there's the, stressful news, lab tests, diagnosis, results, anything like that, or maybe you're just, in the waiting room for a really long period of time, and waiting to see the physician. And then by the time the physician actually gets in the room, stress levels are so high that you have a conversation with them, but how much of what they shared do you actually remember? So what I know now is that, what I would see is that patients would be super stressed and we would have this whole conversation and then the physician would leave the room and I would say, so tell me what you understood from what they just said, and people wouldn't remember. Or they would only remember small pieces of information. And so what I know now is that when we're in a state of stress, our brain actually secretes cortisol, and that makes it hard for us to pay attention. What's more, stress has a whole host of effects on the inflammation that we have inside our body and our immune function. So as we exist in a state of stress, levels of inflammation start to rise, and our body then has to spend energy attacking that inflammation to bring it back down, over time weakening our immune system. And as we all know, anytime we're facing a life-threatening illness or an illness of any kind, really, we need our immune system to be functioning as well as it possibly can. And so stress is one of those things that we can learn to manage. And as we do, what we see is it actually changes the structure of our DNA. So there's these caps at the ends of our DNA called telomeres. And they protect our DNA and prevent it from degrading. So the older we get, the shorter those telomeres get, our DNA starts to unwind and break down, and we get disease and illness. Mindfulness, learning to be fully present in the moment and working with our mental life, actually increases the length of those telomeres. So it has a neuroprotective effect, which then, sort of translates into wellness and longevity. So there's the physiologic component of stress and then also mindfulness. And then there's the experiential component of just what it's like to go through that process. And also how it changes our judgment and decision making. So an example of this might be, anytime we're in a stressful situation or something happens in our lives that we deem as possibly threatening, we perceive that thing in relation to us. So whether it's a real threat, like a diagnosis, or whether it's a perceived threat, like our fear of what someone else might think of us, that perception, then our mind narrates it. It tells us a story about the experience that we're having, about the experience in relation to us. So any thought that starts with I am so stressed, I am so worried, I am not going to perform well, I am angry, why is this happening? These types of tapes, it's actually controlled by a center in our brain that sits right behind our eyes called our posterior cingulate cortex. And our posterior cingulate cortex, or PCC for short, is our self-referencing center. It's seeing everything in relation to us. And because it sits right behind our eyes, it's really close to our brainstem. So each one of those thoughts, I am so worried, for example, sends signals from our brain down our spinal cord. Our spinal cord then innervates all the visceral organs in our body, sending signals to our body that cause our body to believe as though that thought is true. Our body then mounts a response, a physiologic response that sends signals back up to our brain, causing that same thought to repeat over and over again. I am so worried. I am so worried. I'm so angry. Why is this happening? On repeat. Each time that thought fires, a cascade of events goes from our brain down our spinal cord. We have a bunch of feelings. Our body then, all of those feelings send signals back up to our brain. And it's a sort of like a thinking, feeling, thought loop. And the more that goes on for, the longer that goes on for, the more real or the more significant that experience then becomes. Pretty soon, we are actually walking around embodying our own mental state. It's a phenomenon called embodied cognition. I am worry. I am fear. I am anger. And as we're walking around embodying that mental state, it's changing our perception. So they're like goggles that we put on, like worry goggles, fear goggles, anger goggles. And as we look through them, those lenses change what we see and actually leave us more prone to misperceive other situations in our lives. So if I'm worried about something, then as I will look out through my worry goggles, I'm going to see other things to be worried about. And that starts to mount and mount and mount. And pretty soon we can get into a real state of stress. If you were on like a 0 to 10 scale, if we don't pump the brakes on that process, we can get all the way to a 10. So knowing what a 10 feels like for you and knowing what like a 1 feels like, it's really important, right? Because we can use those feelings as a guide in the present moment to tell us where we're at. So one of the things I tell my clients is to find your 5. what does a 5 stress state feel like for you? Because a 5 is sort of like that razor's edge. Like a 1, 2, 3, maybe we're pretty relaxed. We're not really on point. If I'm playing football, I'm like maybe standing out in the field and I'm not really like noticing what's going on. If I'm, at home or even driving, really, maybe I'm not very alert to important pieces of information that might come my way. But the same is true at 8, 9, 10. In those higher states of activation, I'm also not really effective because I'm overwhelmed. And so all that cortisol is being secreted and I'm not going to take in important pieces of information. So, down here, we kind of have boredom and disengagement. Over here, we have anxiety and overwhelm. So a 5 is like that razor's edge where we're alert and oriented, but we're not so alert that we're overwhelmed. And that's kind of when we can figure out what that feels like for us, we can know when we can know how to bring ourselves up, or we can know how to bring ourselves down using mindfulness techniques. So one technique to bring ourselves into the present moment is just to like put your hands on the chair. Feel the fabric of the chair. Feel your body in the seat. Feel your sit bones. Feel the soles of your feet on the floor. The pressure of your shoes. And then take a deep breath. Take a really deep diaphragmatic breath into the belly. Feeling the belly expand and contract. When we breathe deep down into our belly, it actually, it pulls on something called our vagus nerve, which sends signals from our body back up to our brain, causing our parasympathetic nervous system, or like the brakes, to engage. So when we're really active, it's like pushing on the gas. That's our sympathetic nervous system. We start breathing really shallow up here into our chest. Gas, 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 gas. And when we breathe down here into the bases of our lungs, into our belly, and then really slow down that release, it's like pumping the brakes on our nervous system. So that's one of the things we can do to create a little bit of space between our thoughts that allow us to drop in and become more aware of what's happening in the moment. So it might not happen instantaneously, but if you do that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 breaths, you should create a little bit of space. And then we can ask ourselves, what thoughts do I notice? What's present in my mind right now? And with mindfulness, we relate to our mental life with a set of attitudes that allow us to work effectively with ourselves. Non-judgment, not judging myself for the thoughts, not wishing that they would be any different, acceptance, allowing them to be exactly as they are, being openness to whatever arises in the moment. And curiosity, like you're a scientist in the laboratory of your mind. Getting really curious. What can I notice about the experience that I'm having right now? And then can we notice it? Like literally note what it is. This is the experience of worry. Oh, this is what fear feels like. I'm noticing a tightness in my chest. I'm noticing a tightness in my abdomen. Everything feels constricted. Allowing it to be, sensing into it, moving into it, rather than trying to make it go away. Anytime there's an unpleasant sensation, our inclination is to try to get rid of it. Ooh, no, I don't want this. Make this stop. But actually, whatever we resist persists. The more we try to make it go away, the bigger it gets. And so with mindfulness, we practice turning toward what is uncomfortable with an attitude of gentleness and kindness, and feeling into it. maybe not all the way into it, but can we just hover the focus of our attention at the edges and be compassionate with ourselves for the fact that this is a challenging experience? And once again, labeling it. This is what fear feels like. Wow, I am really experiencing anger. And you'll notice that I am intentionally using language where I am observing the experience that I'm having. Because remember, I said that any sentence that starts with I am activates our posterior cingulate cortex, right? That self-referencing center behind our eyes. That is our subjective experience of the here and now. I am changes the filters of perception that we're seeing through. But I am experiencing actually engages our prefrontal cortex. And so that's the part of our brain that's the more developed part. It's the higher order functions where we can observe the experience that we're having. And if I can observe what's happening with me in the moment, I can do something about it. But if I'm just the one experiencing it, I am that thing. So by changing the language, this is the experience of, I'm noticing what I am experiencing. We're able to objectively look back on what's happening with us in the moment. And then practicing some grounding techniques. Noticing the space that surrounds the body. Feeling the weight of the body held and supported by the chair or by gravity. And then sensing the space that surrounds us, that sense of spaciousness or expansiveness. And so from that pause where our thoughts aren't just racing and ruminating from one thing to the next, we can become aware of the stories that we're telling ourselves. So one of the things I want to share with you is another thing that I teach my clients is pretty simple, but really profound if we do it. And it's how you shift a negative thought to a positive thought, and then to a state of no mind. So how do we get into that place of just being in the moment without constantly being preoccupied with the content of our mind narrating the experience that we're having? We don't get there, so when we're in that state of no mind, that's like, they call it flow, but we're totally absorbed in the experience that we're having, fully immersed in it, and time sort of slows down. There's a sense of like peace and joy, and it's sort of like deemed as like the highest state that people would want to get to right now, in this period of scientific research on mind, brain, and behavior, because it's when we're performing at our best. It's when we're fully engaged with the person that's in front of us, or the task at hand. So we don't get to that state of no mind from a negative mind. We have to first shift from a negative mind to a positive mind, and then we hang out in a positive mind long enough where we eventually just fall into no mind. So whatever we practice is what grows. If I'm just constantly in a negative mind, if I'm constantly worried and afraid, I'm going to start seeing more things negatively and more reasons to be afraid. But the opposite is also true. So if I'm working on cultivating optimism, if I'm intentionally doing gratitude practices, then I'm intentionally working on creating a pattern, and those things then become the filters of my perception in the present moment. So when we notice a negative thought, can we first note what it is? Maybe even write it down. What's the thought that keeps repeating over and over again? And then we question it. Is it true? Is it 100% true? Is it real? Is this thing really happening right now? Is it 100% real? And if it is true, if it is real, then is it serving me? Is this thought that keeps playing over and over again helping me in some way? So if those answers are no, then to shift it would be thinking about, okay, well, what's a thought that would be more accurate? something that would be more true, more real? What's a thought that would serve me best? So we start to shift that negative to a positive. And then I might even challenge you to come up with like an epic thought. What is the best possible version that could be? So here's the thing. When we come up with that epic thought, that thought that just like blows us out of the water, that makes us feel great, we want to find a few reasons to back it up. So can you look back on your life and find a few examples of when this might have been true for you? And then as we demonstrate to ourselves that we have the right to think this epic thought, it starts to gradually shift our mental state. And we can kind of like grind that in as almost like an affirmation that we tell ourselves. And then from that place, eventually we fall into no mind. That state where we're just fully present in the moment, where we've finally gotten out of all of the negative mental chatter. So from becoming aware of the negative thought, questioning it, is it true? Is it accurate? Is it helpful? Shifting to a positive thought, something that's more true, more accurate, more helpful. Potentially even finding an epic thought. What's something that just makes us feel totally on point and confident? Finding 2 reasons to back that up, 2 examples of things that might have been similar. I can get through hard things. I can do hard things. Here's an example of a time I've done a hard thing. Here's another example of a time I've done a hard thing. So then I actually believe it because I can recall other times when that has been true. And then I start to grind that in a little bit. And eventually I find that state of no mind. So all of these things happen in the present moment. It's not really like you do it once and then it's done, but it's a way of working with the stress and the difficulties as they arise. Another thing that you can do is we talked about, optimism and gratitude being filters of perception. So can you just make a gratitude list before you go to bed at night? One thing. Can you just write down one thing that you're grateful for? And even if the day was total garbage, can you find something in the middle of the garbage to be grateful for? Like a silver lining. Something good that came out of it. Maybe it was a smile or something that can be really simple. Because the more we start to intentionally look for those things, the more we're going to find them. So I teach a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which was actually developed at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, working with patients. And it's a collection of practices that I'm looking for something that I want to share with you. It's a collection of practices, mindfulness practices, like the body scan, like breathing, like awareness of thoughts and emotions that actually have really significant outcomes. It's been shown to reverse cardiovascular disease, psoriasis, like all of these different things. And it's been studied in cancer too. So there's a woman named Linda Carlson out of the University of Calgary who has adapted mindfulness-based stress reduction specifically for oncology. And it's called Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery. And so this is a pretty simple book. You'll see I have it marked up. It's a lot of really good content. And so if you find yourself curious about how mindfulness might help you in your journey, this is definitely a book that I would pick up. Linda Carlson, Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery. So it's got the practices. And I think that if you were to look at it online, especially, I think the study is open for breast cancer and for colorectal cancer, but I know that she had a study that she was enrolling people in where you got access to an app and guided meditations that you could do while you were, say, like receiving an infusion. And I'm not sure where that study is at, but it could be something worth looking into if you're curious about that. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for this time, and I hope some of that was helpful for anyone. Just remember, mindfulness always happens in the present moment. Any moment that you realize you're not present, suddenly you are. And in that moment is an opportunity to do something different. In that moment is an opportunity for change. A moment of awareness is all it takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for watching. We hope you'll join us next week for tips for resiliency. Bye, everyone. Have a great Wednesday.